Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Pat Turner, and I'm current president of the World Veterinary Association. And I'd like to welcome all of our attendees today to the WVA's virtual seminar on food security. We have an engaging set of expert speakers and panelists lined up for our session today. And in advance of this session, I'd really like to thank the WVA Secretariat, the One Health Strategic Focus Group, as well as the webinar vet team for all of their work in organizing this session. Ensuring global food security is a fundamental challenge of our times and is linked to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals of zero hunger and poverty reduction by 2030. In 2021, when coupled together with the global COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing environmental impact of climate change, we can appreciate accelerated risks for hunger, undernutrition, and malnutrition in vulnerable and low-income communities and countries all around the world. Ensuring global food security is a One Health challenge, requiring veterinarians to work with farmers and others to ensure environmentally sustainable and acceptable production practices for food of animal origin, such as bees, poultry, meat rabbits, farmed fish and seafood, as well as traditional livestock species. Veterinarians are needed at all stages of production to ensure food security. From overseeing appropriate management, treatment, and care practices are in place for animals, to training veterinary paraprofessionals for community projects to improve livestock health and breeding performance, to control animal disease and development of biosecurity protocols, as well as ensuring that appropriate health surveillance measures and diagnostic support systems are available to minimize animal losses. It is critical that veterinarians be thinking about how they can step forward to support this effort. So our speakers will be addressing these very issues today, and without further delay, I'll hand things over to our moderator, Dr. Anthony Chadwick, to start our seminar. Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patricia. It's great to interject between the two Guelphians. So we've got Evan and Patricia, who I think are a couple of minutes walk away from each other, but meeting each other in the virtual space. So thank you, Patricia, for that great opening. And we're very fortunate today to have Professor Evan Fraser, who's going to be talking to us today about obviously the topic of food security. And Evan has a great CV. He's a professor of geography at Guelph University, and he leads the team on the Food for Thought initiative. Evan's interest in agriculture began when he used to watch his grandfather picking fruit on the Niagara Escarpment, and continues to today. He began his academic career in Leeds in the UK, so he came over to England, to the mother country, to study farming and climate change and to lecture in those areas. And Evan continues to work with large multidisciplinary teams to really try and work out the conundrum of how we're going to feed the growing world population whilst not destroying our very precious ecosystem. He's the author of 2 books and many academic papers. One of his books is called Empires of Food, Feast, Famine, and the Rise and Fall of Civilizations. And he is also a star of the internet with his video series, Feeding 9 Billion, which has had close to 1 million views. As well as, and I am looking forward to play this game at some point, a card game about global food security. So some really fascinating insights that I'm really looking forward to, Evan, and the floor is yours.
So thanks, Anthony. And I'm going to share my screen. And maybe, Anthony, before you go off, you could just give me a quick thumbs up that you can hear me and see my screen.
That looks absolutely fabulous. Thank you, Evan.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So what a pleasure to be here and chatting with you all. As Anthony has just said, I'm going to speak to you today about one of the world's biggest problems. How are we going to feed the future? And in this talk, I'll try to touch on a wide range of issues, include a little bit of animal agriculture, which is the stuff that you folks are probably most aware of and most interested in. But my goal is really to provide you an introduction and a high-level survey to the topic. And probably an important place or an appropriate place to start is with the challenge of population growth. And probably, as we all know, the world's population currently sits at around 8 billion people, and this is set to grow for at least another couple of decades. And when you put all this together, it means that we are going to need more food. A lot more food, as it turns out. According to The Economist magazine, that ran an article on this a few years ago, in the next 40 years, humans are going to need to produce more food than they did in the previous 10,000 put together. 10,000 years, I beg your pardon, put together. And of course, we have to contend with climate change while we deal with that gargantuan task of producing all this food, which threatens to make food harder and more expensive to produce, threatens to make some of our most fertile regions significantly less fertile. But when I present the world's food security challenge in this way, it really focuses on production. And it makes us seem that if we could just address climate change and food production and boost production, we'll have a well-fed future. And of course, the problem is far, far more complicated than that simple narrative allows us to have. First, we have to wrestle with the fact that food distribution today is actually very inequitable. Today, there is probably enough food for the world's population in some measures, but yet it's not very well distributed. And I can actually think of no better way to explore the issue of distribution with you than to simply show you two photographs from what I think has to be my favorite photo essay of all time. It's called The Hungry Planet. It's by two journalists, Peter Menzel and Faith DeLuzio. It was published about 15 years ago, so it's getting a little dated, but these two journalists had the genius idea of traveling around the world and taking formal family portraits with families from different cultures. And the great thing is they posed each family with a week's worth of groceries. And in this way, they introduce us to the Revis family, pictured here from North Carolina. 15 years ago, the Revis family spent apparently about $85 per person per week on food. I think it's worth pausing to revel in the color of the American diet, the packaging that goes into our food system, and I guess the extraordinary lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. Of course, it invites the obvious comparison with the Ntomo family from Mali. $1.76 per person per week is what they spent on food, largely vegetarian diet, largely free of packaging. And you cannot look at these two photographs and help but conclude that we live in a deeply, structurally really inequitable world. And unfortunately, the data really backs this up. Here we see the cover of last fall's annual United Nations State of Food Security report. Provides sobering insights that provide that for the last 5 years, we've, in a row, both hunger and obesity have been rising at a global level. So that's the challenge, distribution. We also have to ask the question, are we producing the right kinds of food for everyone to enjoy a healthy diet? And a couple of seconds ago, I said we're producing enough food, and technically that is correct. We are producing enough food for everybody. We are currently producing about 2,800 calories per person per day on the planet, which is enough. But it's not necessarily the right kinds of food for us all to be healthy. And so what I'm going to show you is on the left-hand side of the screen will appear what we should be eating according to the well-known Harvard University's nutritional guideline called the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate Diet. And on the right-hand side of the screen, I've used United Nations data to explore what we actually are producing at a global level. And we begin with the fruits and vegetables that we all should be eating more of. About half of our diet should be made up of fruits and vegetables. Yet when you look at the actual production data, you realize that we're only producing a small proportion of the world's food are fruits and vegetables. Indeed, the team that I worked with to publish this data calculated that we would need to almost quadruple our global production of fruits and vegetables if we wanted to just produce enough for everyone to be able to follow dietary guidelines. And that's not assuming that people could then afford those foods. By contrast, we should have about 20% of our diets be cereals and starches, whereas the vast majority of our food system are cereals and starches. And here it's really important to note that the cereals and starches on the right-hand side of this slide are for human consumption. That does not include livestock feed. Oils and fats should make up a very small proportion of our diet, yet may represent a major part of the global food system. Meats and alternatives and dairy products are a little bit difficult to interrogate, given there is a lack of consensus amongst nutritionists about how much or even if we should be eating these products. So I'll come back to this point in the meat issue in a few minutes, and move to the kicker or the punchline of this slide, which is the sugars that we all should be limiting, yet nevertheless make up a huge proportion of the global food system. And I think it stands pretty obvious that when you see the data presented in this way, it's difficult not to conclude that there's some sort of fundamental mismatch between what we produce and what we should be eating, and that perhaps this mismatch finds something to do with its roots in our cases of skyrocketing obesity and diabetes. Then, of course, we've also have to talk about things like food waste. Most reports suggest that somewhere between a third and a half of the world's food that we produce is never eaten by humans. And to put that into context, here's some data published a few years ago by the city of Vancouver that suggests that Metro Vancouver wastes 80,000 potatoes, 30,000 eggs, and 70,000 cups of milk each day. And then, of course, there's agriculture's environmental footprint. Unfortunately, the global agri-food systems are responsible for somewhere between a quarter and a third of global greenhouse gas emissions. And the data is also quite clear. Agriculture is the world's largest driver in habitat loss and biodiversity loss. Agriculture uses more fresh water than any other human activity. And agriculture is the world's biggest source of water pollution. And what you're looking at here is one of the algae blooms from Lake Erie, one of Canada and the US's Great Lakes. All of which is to say that developing the strategies to safely, nutritiously, equitably, and sustainably feed the world's growing population has to be ranked as one of the biggest challenges we face over the upcoming century. Okay, with that being said, I'd like to pivot to use that horribly overused 2020 word and discuss how technology, if we deploy it properly, can solve, or at least partly solve, some of these problems. And in order to set this part of my talk up, let me share with you an anecdote that I sometimes use to illustrate the scale of technological changes currently underway in food and farming systems. And Anthony mentioned that when I was a kid, I had a grandfather with a farm in the Niagara Peninsula in southwestern Ontario. That's a picture of me on that farm. I'm sitting on my grandfather's lap. I'm guessing this picture was taken in the mid-1970s. And as a teenager, I used to stand on the back of this tractor where my brother and my cousins are currently standing in this picture. And one of my jobs was to throw handfuls of fertilizer pellets off the back of the tractor as Grandpa would drive slowly through the melons and the sweet corn and the strawberry fields. Now, unfortunately, with the benefit of both hindsight and a PhD in agriculture, I'm going to estimate that 50% of that fertilizer did not end up in the right place or at the right time for the plants to utilize, and either worked its way into the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas or into the water table as pollution. But that was then, back in the dark ages of the 1980s and the 1990s. And this is now the fully autonomous smart tractor, capable of knowing where it is in the field and applying the right amount of fertilizer at the right place, at the right time, for each individual plant to utilize on a meter-by-meter basis with maximum efficiency. The advent of these high-tech robotic tools is sometimes called the digital agricultural revolution, or Ag 4.0, lots of different monikers. And it probably began 10 years ago or so. We started to see these products or these tools crop up. And, to be honest, the dairy industry was at the vanguard of this transition with the robotic milkers that have become very common in some parts of the world, including in Ontario, where about half of our dairy farms now use robotic milkers. And the interesting thing about the dairy milkers, or the robotic milkers, is they more or less autonomously milk the cows, so reduced labor requirements. And while they're being milked, the robots capture the biometric data that helps the farmer manage the herd health, enhance animal nutrition, maintain productivity, identify mastitis before the cow even knows she's sick, let alone the farmer thinks to call in one of you folks to diagnose it. And that probably means that farmers with robotic milkers use less antibiotics, for instance, to treat mastitis. Now, similar changes as this are happening up and down the food chain, including smart packaging materials that biodegrade but also change color when food goes bad. And that's a way of enhancing food safety, reducing food waste, as well as reducing the pollution that comes off of food in the form of plastics, all the way through to what sometimes are called blockchain-enabled e-commerce platforms. These would be computerized systems that allow greater transparency from farm to fork. So consumers can see what the farmer was doing with their food, and the farmer can really understand what the consumer is demanding. As a result, many folks in this field believe that the next big digital frontier will be the application of digital tools to food and farming systems, and that we will be able to help improve food security through technology. And the literature really gets quite breathless with excitement that not only are there huge business opportunities, but we can produce more food on less land, we can reduce waste, and we can feed the world's growing population while shrinking the environmental footprint of our food system all at the same time. But if all this maybe sounds a little too good to be true, then I think you have right to be critical. So I'm going to pause for a minute and I'm going to reflect a little more critically and drill into two specific kinds of technologies, which are capturing a lot of people's imagination right now, but I think need a little bit more explanation. And I'd like to start with the broad area of vertical farming or indoor horticulture. Now, investment money and media attention has poured into vertical farming really recently. And I think a large part of this is very, very significant and very legitimate. My very strong prediction is that over the next 5 years, we will see a rapid deployment of technologies that will bring fruit and vegetable production both indoors and closer to home, even in places like Canada, where we've got a growing season that usually doesn't allow us to produce fruits and vegetables in the winter. For instance, we know that there's well-established tomato, cucumber, and pepper operations using traditional greenhouses, high degree of automation that are giving us year-round production in some key things. That's only going to grow and become more sophisticated in the next little while. This approach to food production is picking up space. As a result, proponents of vertical farming really believe that we are moving to a point where we can produce, and the phrase that I keep hearing is any crop, anywhere, anytime. But let's pause again. While I do think this technology has tremendous potential, I don't think we're there yet. For instance, first of all, vertical farming today mostly produces expensive salads, which really isn't, in my opinion, a very exciting part of a global food security strategy. So let's be realistic here about what vertical farming is and what it does. In addition, there's also some very important pieces of research that really need to be undertaken before we can get this level of ambition. First, we need more varieties of crops that are bred for year-round production. Like I just said, mostly it's producing salads. Well, we need strawberries, we need blueberries. I actually just started working with a vertical farming company that's producing high-end, high-protein livestock feed on vertical farms in the form of microgreens, then are feeding them to cows as a addition to a ration. So that's a very interesting livestock-related animal agriculture application of vertical farming. Second, we need more work to be done on mechanical harvesting to bring the costs down, because it's no good to just be producing expensive salads if we want this to be a viable food security strategy. Third, and this is a really interesting one from a science perspective, we need more research to be done on how fruits and vegetables perform differently under wavelengths of light. Now, I realize that you folks are veterinarians and interested in animals, but I couldn't help but show you 3 heads of lettuce, because I think this is just illustrates where this technology is going, and I find it fascinating. So here's some, this work was done by a colleague of mine, Mike Dixon at the University of Guelph. The lettuce on the right, which is under the blue light, produces a lot of what are called antioxidants that gives the leaves the purple color. The lettuce in the middle was produced under red light, and that lettuce is actually twice as big as the lettuce on the right. And the lettuce on the left is the control one produced under white light. And what Mike has discovered is that you can actually completely change the shape, the texture, the size, and the taste of vegetables and fruit just simply by changing the wavelength of light that the plant grows under. Mike, for instance, has shown that if you start lettuce off with red light, they grow really big, and then you change them to blue light for the last couple of days, you get the antioxidants that give them the purple leaves, and you can get a premium in the marketplace. So my message to you is that this space, this vertical farming space, is going to be huge, but we're not quite there yet. Not all the research has been done, and we really need to be thinking a bit more ambitiously about using technologies for food security rather than just producing expensive, high-quality salads. I'd like to now shift to technology number 2, which is also capturing people's imagination, and that's, of course, the protein revolution, which threatens to be incredibly disruptive. And here I'm talking, of course, about the advent of plant-based protein, but also this thing called cellular agriculture that involves synthesizing what are ostensibly animal proteins in the laboratory. Now, these products hit the news in 2020 with the initial public offerings of Beyond and Impossibles and whatnot. We now have companies like Tyson and Canada's own Maple Leaf, traditional livestock protein companies investing heavily in this space. To quote a Canadian, very senior Canadian meat guy, Michael McCain, he says the future is higher quality, but less quantities of meat, but more protein. So Maple Leaf is pivoting away from being a meat company to being a protein company. Huge implications for all sorts of people. There's lots of controversies. A lot of consumers, of course, have criticized these products as being hyper-processed and high in salt. Other people are deeply concerned that a large amount of what's on this screen is bioengineering. And for instance, the ingredient that gives this new generation of meatless burgers their meaty texture is a molecule called heme that all mammals have in their blood. It bonds to iron. It's what makes meat pink and juicy, and it caramelizes when it grills. But it comes from a bioengineering experiment, and consumers are raising concerns about this. Is this a natural food? And we get caught up in a very complicated discussion around that. With that said, I wanted to put a company on your radar, which I think will prove to be incredibly disruptive and have major implications for the world's food systems and animal agriculture. And it's a company called Perfect Day. I learned about it last summer. And they very explicitly position themselves as an agent for positive change. Down at the bottom right-hand side of this slide, they say that they make dairy perfect, which I was giving the slide or giving a version of this talk to the dairy farmers of Ontario recently. And they find this rather problematic because Perfect Day does not use cows. It was started about 5 years ago by two chemical engineers in Silicon Valley that bioengineered a form of yeast that digests starches and produces a molecule that is identical to dairy protein. And it's a vegan dairy protein. And ice cream made with this protein is now available across the USA. I would be driving down to Buffalo today to try some if the border was open. And I have it on good authority that this makes really good ice cream and is completely chemically, culinarily indistinguishable from regular ice cream. So, but when we think about this technological revolution coming at us, we have to ask the question, what on earth is going to happen to animal agriculture? Maybe we can help improve the environmental performance of our food system, but there's about 1 billion people on the planet today that depend on animal agriculture for their livelihoods. If they lose their livelihoods, what impact is that going to have on food security? Are we facing a moment analogous to what must have happened 100 years ago as tractors replaced draft animals on farms? Are cattle ranchers and dairy operators going to go the same way as blacksmiths did 100 years ago and simply be replaced by technology? I'm not going to try to answer this question right now. I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A, but I'd like to shift a little bit into the final moments of this talk and talk a little bit about what sort of policy changes I think have to happen in order to maximize the benefits of these technologies while mitigating the negative consequences. And my first point is that if one of the benefits of this digital agricultural revolution is to reduce the agriculture's impact on the environment, then governments really need to be creating what are called eco-fiscal incentives or payment for ecosystem services. In other words, financial rewards to farmers who protect the environment. This would help, such as carbon taxes, such as illustrated on this slide. So policies like carbon taxes could help farmers or other agents adopt low carbon or low environmental impact technologies and really create incentives to help reward agents, processors, producers, etc., who protect the environment. Second, one of the big impacts of this is going to be a real radical change in how food production and processing is done. And this means we need a new approach to training. Given that the disruption, I think, is coming, if we want to manage this disruption of this technology, we need to be training the youth of the future leader in a better way. And this really means three things. In my opinion, I think we need to be continuing to focus on and promoting the traditional agricultural disciplines, animal husbandry, veterinary science, soil science, crop science. But we also need to be realizing that the future leader is going to be a data scientist. So we need better integration between the engineering and computer science departments and the agricultural colleges. That means our ag students and our veterinary students need to be better data managers. At the same time, our computer scientists and engineers need to have an understanding of ag and vet science. That's not going to be enough, though. Workplace study after workplace study tells us that students also need foundational skills of critical thinking, social perceptiveness, group work The technologies are changing so fast that students can't just be technologically expert. They also need to be good team players and have those foundational or soft skills. Bringing all those three things together, though, the traditional ag disciplines and veterinary disciplines, the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, math, and the foundational skills, though, will be a real challenge for our colleges and our universities. And the third and final piece of policy advice that I would like to leave with you is to go back to that slide from the Hungry Planet that I had at the beginning of my talk. And I'd like to remind us all that we live in this deeply inequitable world. Problems of food insecurity, which is defined as a lack of ability to access healthy food, will not be solved with anything I've talked about in the last few slides. Food insecurity is a social and an economic problem linked with poverty and colonialism and racism. We know that food insecurity disproportionately affects Black, Indigenous people of color. Those people have been exacerbated, or food insecurity amongst those groups has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So if we want to address this particular pernicious issue, food insecurity, which is a subset of food security, we need, I think, progressive social policies linked with things like basic incomes and programs to address racism and forms of marginalization. Food insecurity, in other words, is a social problem and only will be solved with social programming. So with that said, let me wrap up. In my opinion, one of the next big frontiers of technological innovation is the digital agriculture revolution. It will shape our health, it will shape our communities, our relationship with the planet. I think if it's properly done, it will generate a tremendous amount of wealth. What we have to work hard in order for it to not have major disruptions, negative disruptions, such as the billion people on the planet who currently depend on agriculture. And finally, although I'm under I'd like to stress that I'm under no illusions. These technologies that we're facing, that we hope will address global food security, are not a panacea. No technology ever is, but perhaps with collaborative policy making, we can address some of these big social issues associated with food security. So that's it from me. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Evan. That was fantastic. We're obviously going to take questions towards the end. So we're going to move on quickly to Saskia Hendricks, who's from USAID, and she's going to be speaking about the contribution of animal source food to food security. Saskia is a vet epidemiologist, and she's the Deputy Director of Feed the Future Innovation Lab at the University of Florida. Before working at the University of Florida, Saskia worked at the World Health Organization and also the International Livestock Research Institute, where she was looking at many different areas, but one was the surveillance of zoonotic livestock diseases. So really, really looking forward to your talk, Saskia, and it's over to you. Just unmute yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much. And just to clarify, I'm not employed by USAID. I am employed by the University of Florida. So thank you for this opportunity. I would like to explain a bit more about the contributions of animal source foods to food security. And with that, I would like to start with the definition. And I'm not going to read it all out, but food security is not only about the quantity of food, but it's also that food also needs to be safe and nutritious. And as Ivan already explained, food security or food insecurity really differs around the world, and this map shows that. And it is also important to realize that there are many threats to food security. Climate change, of course, is on top, but there's also, access to land, there are pests and diseases, and also conflicts. And again, also something that Ivan already mentioned, vulnerability to food insecurity really differs. And this is very much intersectional. So it differs with gender and class and age. And again, the COVID-19 crisis that started last year really highlighted that, and countries that were shown in green in the previous slide actually had millions and millions of people that depended on food banks because they just didn't have enough to feed their families. So now I would like to go a bit more into detail about livestock and the link to food security. So we know that the growth in the agricultural sector yields a greater reduction in nutritional stunting than any other economic growth. So that's good. However, we also know that many of the people that are involved in agriculture, including livestock, are those that are food insecure. However, also on a positive note, I would like to mention that there is evidence, and this evidence is growing, that households, livestock holders are more likely than their counterparts to consume animal source foods. And I'll explain that more later. Now, why this is important to set the scene is because 70% of the world's rural poor depend on livestock for important parts of their livelihoods. Here to the right side of the slide, it's an adaptation. We show an adaptation of the UNICEF conceptual framework of the determinants of child undernutrition. And in green, you see how livestock production systems can contribute to that. Now, why I want to show this is because we need to look broader than just food security or food insecurity. It's not so straightforward to ultimately achieve improved nutrition. There are many other factors, many other determinants that influence this process. Another important concept I would like to introduce to you is stunting. And here in this picture, this is a picture from Tanzania. And the white line on the screen, or on the wall really, is the World Health Organization's standard height for 9-year-olds. And all these children, as you can see, are far below that line. Now, you may think, well, maybe they're just short. Unfortunately, these children are stunted. Stunting is an indicator for chronic malnutrition. And it's relatively easy to measure as it's height for age, or Z-score. While this is not the only indicator or necessarily the best one, it is an important indicator because it measures the culmination of a complex set of drivers, such as droughts and different food crises. So that it's difficult to measure, but it's a very good indicator. On the next slide, and I need to slow down here because I need to really explain this carefully. This figure shows that stunting is inversely related to meat consumption. Now, I want to really stress, and that's why I slow down, that this is simply showing an association and does not account for the myriad of factors that contribute to animal source foods consumption, many which are confounders and also have an effect on child growth, such as, for example, education levels of the mothers. And this is part of a publication that our team here at the University of Florida published, and I'll share the link later in the chat. Stunting is unfortunately, it's a very common problem, and over 160 million children under the age of 5 are stunted across the world. And unfortunately, these are mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia. Now, you may think, we are vets, why are we talking about children and stunting and all of that? Well, I just want you to realize, and I hope it all comes together at the end of the presentation, but stunting is very important. Children that are stunted are 4 times more likely to die than those that are not. It also impacts on IQ. So, school success and future careers really depend on that. And obviously, ultimately, the workforce and economy suffer from it because, and for a country like Ethiopia, it was estimated that stunting contributes to losses in the gross domestic product as high as 16%. Now, in terms of animal source foods are the best high-quality, nutrient-rich foods for children in the age 6 to 23 months of age. This is referenced by the World Health Organization. We know studies have shown that the cognitive function, is better in animal source food consumers as opposed to non-consumers. And why is that? Animal source foods are really, really good source of protein, energy, iron, iodine. I won't read it all out, but I just want to also highlight among the vitamins, vitamin B12 is extremely important for brain development. And apart from seaweed, algae, you cannot have really a good source of B12, but animal source foods actually is a very good source of vitamin B12. It is also much more available. So all these nutrients are much more bioavailable as compared to plant-based products. And then the last point here, these animal source foods are dense. And why is that so important? Because if you think of these small children, 6 to 23 years of age, their stomach is about the size of their fist, but they have very high nutrient demand. So you really want to be very strategic, in what you feed these children so that their needs are met. Unfortunately, a study from UNICEF last year showed that 59% of children are not fed these much needed nutrients, and probably due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this has even worsened. This is also a field that has, evidence has become much more available in this sense. And I know this is a terribly busy slide, but I just want to show you that in the last 5 years, more and more evidence has become available. And from all these studies, I would like to explain a bit more in detail the one from McEwen and all. Dr. Sarah McEwen is a colleague from the University of Florida, and she conducted research in Burkina Faso, West Africa, and as part of the Innovation Lab for Livestock System. So she designed, of their team, I should say, designed a culturally tailored behavior change intervention. She worked with, so she is a public health nutritionist. She worked with doctors, veterinarians, animal scientists, and they designed this intervention, and they were able to increase egg intake in infants from 0 to 6 eggs a week. This is in the full intervention study that received chickens and training, but also the group that only received the training about the benefit of egg consumption. In that group, egg intake increased with 2.4 eggs a week at the end line. It reduced wasting and underweight in these children, and it increased women's decision-making power. And please remember that diagram that I showed, the conceptual framework for UNICEF. Women's decision-making power is very important in terms of, is an important determinant for child nutrition. So this integrated training package that the team developed considered or included aspects on human nutrition, how you actually go about feeding an egg to a small infant, and also on best poultry production practices. And this has been a huge success, and we're looking into expanding this across Burkina Faso, but also to other countries. And I'll share the link also to this publication and a nice short video they developed in the chat in a minute. So to wrap up, I would like to share with you, so there is huge potential in if we could increase the consumption of animal source foods among children in these low and middle income countries, we really can reduce the devastating impacts of stunting and malnutrition. But for that to be successful, we really need multi-sectoral and interdisciplinary approaches. We need to reduce the barriers to animal source food consumption in these countries. And they vary. It is often price, and egg is expensive in many countries, but also milk or meat. There are also taboos that we need to overcome. And sometimes it's a question of access. We also should increase the use of animal source foods to diversify and enrich diets while ensuring moderation. And then last but not least, environmental stewardship of livestock production is needed to ensure that the beneficial effect of animal ownership and animal source food consumption are not negated by environmental impact or zoonotic diseases. So with that, and if you're interested in learning more about our work, I encourage you to go to our website, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Saskia. That was also amazing. Just really sad to see Tanzania. I visited a number of years ago to see so many children stunted. So really great that you've shown that connection there. So thank you so much for that. We're going to stay within the theme of animal health. Moving on to Gijs van het Klooster, who's going to be speaking about contribution of animal health services for food and nutrition security in Ethiopia. Gijs is a vet livestock specialist. He actually has a master's in tropical vet medicine from Utrecht University. And he spent the last 35 years working in Africa and in Asia. Obviously, like Saskia, a veterinary epidemiologist, very interested in animal disease surveillance, tsetse fly control, which of course is a huge problem in Africa, and community animal health. And of course, we're all, I think, concerned about this, the whole One Health concept as well. He's worked for a lot of years on rinderpest, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. So, Gijs, over to you. Oh, you're just muted, Gijs. There we go, just on the bottom left. There we go, great. Thank you, Gijs.
There we are. Okay, thank you very much. And I would say thank you to Saskia as well, because she has provided already quite some information, which I can skip in my first slides. I was thinking of doing it in this way, whereby we talk about definition of food security, and then food and nutrition security in Ethiopia, livestock contribution to food security, and livestock contribution to nutrition. I think some of these are already captured by Saskia. And at the end, the contribution of animal health. Now, here were the definitions, and I think it's clear that this was already presented by Saskia. I will not read the definition then as well, but I think it is food security is food access mainly, and nutrition security is all these added activities like care for feeding, health and sanitation and so on. And I think that is important, and especially in Africa, a lot of accent is always on food access, which means mainly to carbohydrates, filling the stomach. Here you have the sort of differences, and I think in the definition we have to add and supported by environment, adequate sanitation, health services and care. That is the addition to the food security definition. I don't have to go in detail about this. It was also already mentioned by Evans. Population growth is huge. In this case, for example, I have to go the one before. Ethiopia is one of the countries where population growth is tremendous. By 2032, we expect 133 million people, and in 2050, 172 million people. We are really doubling at an enormous speed, and then to keep up food production with that speed of population increase, especially with the budgets available in the country, is a tremendous challenge. The global hunger index is not yet introduced, but I would just like to mention here that the global hunger index is an index that deals with all issues at the same time: undernourishment, child wasting, child stunting, and child mortality. And that was already introduced by Saskia. The global hunger index for Ethiopia has been declining from 53 to 26, which is still serious. So we are not there yet, and it will be extremely difficult to bring that to very acceptable levels below 9.9 in the near future, especially with this dramatic population increase. If you see it broken down, this graph shows the breakdown of the global hunger index scored by indicator. As you can see, the proportion of undernourished population dropped from 27% to 20%. The child stunting, reflecting chronic undernutrition, dropped from 58 to 37%, and child wasting dropped from 12 to 8%. So there are dramatic improvements, but we are not there yet. And this is one of the maps showing the food insecurity in Ethiopia. They are often geographically reflected. That's different from, let's say, the developed world. Here in Ethiopia, food security is very much dependent on agriculture. 80% of the people are depending on agriculture. So if the crop fails in an area, or if there is a drought affecting livestock, it immediately impacts on food security in a geographical area. In the West, it is more of having a job or no job. So the food insecure areas, just because this is the first map I showed for Ethiopia, the pastoral areas are basically these areas, and these areas are the more the highland areas. Here is also still some pastoral area, lowland pastoral areas. The next slide shows that 80% is for the population is dependent on agriculture in Ethiopia. There are at the moment about 10 million chronic food insecure people. And I think that's important. If you are chronically food insecure, even a program what we have tried to introduce, for example, the chicken, as was mentioned by Saskia. If you're chronic food insecure, what we noticed when we did the same is that the poor people start selling the eggs and buying back, the grains to fill the stomach. There is a reduced milk and meat production that directly affect nutrition. So any drought and so on will affect nutrition. Livestock is often an insurance against crop failure in the country. Just for your information, these on the left side, I will not read them out, but that is the livestock population in 2018. So we have got a lot of livestock in the country. And the purposes of livestock are mentioned on the right. Of course, direct food source, if they can afford, but often livestock owners, in terms of drought, if they have got even a proverb that they were hungry and they said, okay, I slaughtered my ox, I ate a kilo, and for what did I slaughter my ox? Now the whole ox is gone. Draft power, manure for fertilization, cash income. It is a living bank, and in many areas it's difficult to have access to a bank. The byproducts are sold, and it contributes to GDP. Here you see this slide shows the livestock contribution to household income. The white areas are the areas that are not included in the survey. So there's only the yellow and the blue areas that you can see. The map on the left shows the blue areas where the income from livestock exceeds that of crops. So that is a large proportion of the country. It highlights the importance of livestock as a source of cash. The map on the right shows areas where the total income of cash and food from livestock exceeds that of crops. So these are mainly showing the pastoral areas of the country. The next slide shows the income of livestock in relation to the total food needs. So if we express the income from livestock sales in convert that into food in kilocalorie equivalent, then you can see that in areas with dark blue, it's over 100% of the kilocalories. That doesn't mean the quality food, but kilocalories is produced more than what they need. And the lighter colors shows the areas where it is less than 100%. But you can see the importance of livestock. So the income from livestock is used to produce staple cereal and then convert it into calories. You can see how big the contribution of livestock in fact is to food security. Of course, this is not the same for all areas. It's not homogeneous. It all depends on having access to markets as well. Here you can see 3 different areas in the pastoral areas and how for the poor people the income is generated. The white is from milk, the yellow is from livestock sales, and the other colors are from other sources. Now, for example, if you have got an area in Afder, which is really has got no access to livestock to markets very well, they supply mainly charcoal. The brown part is a major part of their income. In Hashin, where there is access to milk markets, you can see that milk is an important part of their income. And in Moyale, which is in the border with Kenya, they have access to livestock markets, and you can see that livestock sales is a major contributing factor to their income and thus to food security. We have also asked what were the main constraints of poor households to livestock production. So the top left one shows the constraints to livestock production. And you can see that in the highlands, it's mainly access to credit and capital, the brown color. And in the pastoral areas, it is drought and pasture and water are the limiting factors. On the bottom right, you see how the better off households look at it. And over there, you see that it is mainly pasture and drought, and their animal disease comes in as a factor as well. Much less credit and capital. So you have got a sort of idea that animal health is not the only factor. It is the environment. It is what Evans was mentioning as well, the droughts, the climate change, and those kind of factors. So the livestock contribution to nutrition is mainly by income generation through the sales of livestock, the sales of animal source foods, the sales of non-food products, and the provision of various paid services like draft power. The contribution to nutrition is the consumption of home-produced food. If the better off, normally they consume quite a bit of their own produced animal source food, but the poorer people first have to fill their stomach and often sell the animal source food, and they buy food back. First, of course, the crops, and then if they have got a better income, they will buy back better food. But it's also important in contribution to non-food items like soap. Hygiene is important for nutrition, buying health services, in assets in times of need or crisis. It is an asset in times of need and crisis when there is a person sick in the family. often a sheep or a goat is sold to be able to pay for those services. And of course, in times of need, they may need to sell animals for animal feed and veterinary services.
Just 1 minute, Kees.
What?
Just 1 minute to go.
1 minute to go. Okay, then I will speed up. This was already mentioned, that the over and undernutrition, this is also observed in a developing country like Ethiopia. Here you can see the consumption of Ethiopia as compared to the standards. The consumption is by far less than what is, let's say, recommended. It was already mentioned before. So here you can see from a weekly budget that about 25% of the household income is expended on animal source food. Here we have got animal diseases contribute in two ways. You have got in terms of economic risks, production losses is more towards food security, and human health risks, which is pandemic disease and foodborne illnesses. This is the series of diseases present in Ethiopia, and there are many more, of course. Here you have got the disease ranking that was done by Ethiopia, the diseases that are taken up in policies so that we would be controlling them. These are having impact on public health as well as impact on food, on nutrition security. These are anthrax, brucellosis, rabies, and bovine TB are the ones impact on nutrition security. These are mortality rates that are registered in the country, enormous mortality rates that can only be reduced by massive vaccinations. On the right, you have got the vaccinations done by the veterinary service at the moment. They reach about 100 million, but still it's very little as compared to, let's say, the requirements in the country. But this is a financial issue. Poor livestock owners are often not be able to afford vaccination. Here I have to mention that in Ethiopia, the main poultry disease is Newcastle. It almost wipes out 50% of the poultry population. And I think Newcastle disease vaccination is one important vaccination in improving human nutrition. And we are doing about 19 million out of the 60 million poultry in the country, which is still a very small number, but it is really appreciated by the livestock owners. Disease risk mitigation is important, and that is done by surveillance activities and direct mitigation activities. I think as we have got very limited time, I think you have had a quick browse through that. Control of diseases will, vaccination programs and adequate supply of veterinary services will really be contributing to reducing mortality and making animal source food available in the country. Ethiopia promotes One Health in a big way. This is almost the last slide. I think One Health is really picked up in Ethiopia in a big way, and we will distribute the slides so you can read these ones. Any in dollar invested in nutrition will contribute to $16 return, as from the various Millennium Development Goals will show. And as the last slide, you can see that good health and well-being is related to good animal health services in Millennium Development Goal 3. I'll leave it like that. Over.
That's great, Kees. Thank you so much. Sorry I had to rush you. We're just very keen to have loads of time for questions. So as you say, there are Asante Sana. So we're finally moving on to our final speaker for today is Carla Lucia Verastagoy Castro. So Carla, if you want to start pulling your slides up on the screen and if you share your screen there. Carla is going to talk about the role of vets in food security. Today she's representing the Colegio Médico Veterinario del Peru. She's a consultant for the Peruvian Ministry of Foreign Trade and Tourism, and has also worked as a consultant for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. At this present moment, she's an assistant professor of veterinary medicine at the Universidad Peruana Cayetano Heredia. And I'm really looking forward to us finishing with the role of vets. How are we going to help to sort out the food security problems? So over to you, Carla.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for Spanish, using the Spanish words. Thank you very much. And well, it is a pleasure to talk to all of you about a bit of the experience I've had trying to pursue, as a veterinarian, trying to pursue food security in Peru. It's a big challenge. I just love this graph from the World Organization for Animal Health, actually. It really makes clear our presence all along this very complex trip that food makes from the farm to the table. I'm gonna speak a bit of these functions we have in every single step of the production chain. We, at the first part of the production, animal production, we are in charge of the safe use of veterinary drugs, genetic resources management, feed quality and control and nutrition of the animals, surveillance, prevention, and treatment of diseases, and animal welfare. But we must be aware that we must be involved even before these animals arrive to the farm, because, for example, in farm structure, design, and in the distribution, we must be part of this big team. And I'm going to be talking about being part of the team in my whole presentation. So in transport, for example, we must assure that only healthy animals go to the slaughterhouse. But in this part of monitoring health and welfare during transportation, I must emphasize the important role we have, not only monitoring, because maybe we're not there to monitor the welfare of the animal, but we have to train people. We have to train the driver, for example, and not only train them, but sensitize them in order for them to understand how important and healthy and happy animal is for the production, and of course, for keeping food security. Also inspection and regulation enforcement by the veterinarians that are part of the authorities. In slaughterhouses, you must know, we do have a lot of work to do. I just love this part because it's like the transformation of the animal to food. And we have to make the health status assessment of the animals that are arriving. We have to do the ante and postmortem inspection and condemnation of unacceptable parts of the animal or maybe the whole animal. Keep monitoring pathogens and drug residues or other contaminants that appear there. And of course, and I've been part of a food safety authority, so it's going to be regulation and inspection by the veterinarians that belong to the authority. In the processing plants, we do have something very important to do, and I must tell you about an experience I had when I just finished studying veterinary medicine. I arrived to the processing plant in order to make a traceability program of milk. And the engineer that was in charge of the quality control office, she told me, what are you doing here? You are a vet, you must be with the cows. And it really shocked me, and it really made me think about we should make people understand that even though we love animals, we don't only belong with them, right? So here, our work in the processing plants, and I've seen it from the inspection and law enforcement part, is food traceability. We have an advantage in food traceability because we know what happened before the food arrived into the processing plant. We know where the critical points are. We know how the food can get contaminated in the farm and forward. So, and we know when producers are telling us the truth or just telling something that is not so true. So we have a big advantage there, and we must use it in these multidisciplinary teams we should be participating of, for example, in the management of risk-based food safety systems and inspection, regulation enforcement by the authorities. I must tell you some interesting information about Peru. We have 3 different authorities addressing food safety in our country from 3 different sectors. They're national authorities. And these 3 national authorities delegate some duties of surveillance and control of markets and restaurants to the municipalities or to the local governments. So we also have veterinarians working in local governments and municipalities. And they inspect the markets. Here you can see the fish market and small market from the center of the city. And you can see also restaurants. And we do address all of that. In research and development, and as I said in the beginning, we're everywhere. We're in the private sector, in the government, and in the academia, working to improve production, animal health and welfare, and of course, improve ways of assuring food security and making more sustainable, finding more sustainable ways of producing food. About vets in sanitary authorities, that is what I did, and really it's a lot of work, and it's a big responsibility, but it's an amazing experience. So, of course, we manage health crisis, epidemiological surveillance, disease control and eradication, policy development, and we are in charge right now to make these policies or these regulations, like they have to make enabling environments in order for having more innovation systems and having a more flexible regulations, so people can like go into this adventure of making things more sustainable. And I had this terrible experience in the government when I just arrived. There was a company that was trying to make more sustainable activity, fisheries company. And they said, like, we need to do this, and it's not contemplated in the regulation. And the authorities just said, like, we're sorry, if it's not in the regulation, you cannot do it. But we're gonna waste less, and we're gonna use a lot of more of this, we're gonna produce more protein, you know? No, I'm sorry, if it's not in the regulation, you cannot do that. That thing just made me think about working in policy development, and we veterinarians are prepared for that more. About SPS measures, we are part of tables of negotiation of, for example, free trade agreements. Actually, Peru has a lot of free trade agreements, and we not only negotiate, but we also keep part of the SPS team, and we keep working through years in order to revise some terms and improve trade. So we have risk assessment of imported animals and foods, inspection duties, and we also are in diagnostic laboratories. I'm going to tell you a bit of the experience of Peru. Actually, Peru is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, exporter of fish meal and fish oil. And I must say that Lima, the capital, is by the seacoast. So, and in Lima, we eat 60 kilos per capita per year of chicken. It's a paradox, I know. And we are trying to look for, we're trying to diversify the protein sources. And we're trying to use this experience we have, a fisheries country, in order to also create an environment for enabling aquaculture. What you can see in the right side is vaccination of trouts. We have trouts that they can grow in 3,000 meters, 4,000 meters above sea level, and they develop well. And it's a source of protein, right? And on the other hand, the chickens cannot because of their metabolism. So the big problem I faced when we were trying to promote aquaculture was the aquaculture producers telling us, okay, you want to promote aquaculture, you know that we in aquaculture use a lot of veterinary drugs, like, for example, antimicrobials. And we have no veterinarians. I mean, we really do have small group of veterinarians working in aquaculture right now. So we need to train more veterinarians in that because it's a big challenge, and we've seen it's sustainable. It can be, it is worth it, definitely. Something veterinarians are addressing here in Peru is the fact that when back in 2015, when I used to type food security in Peru, of course in Spanish, I used to find these pictures, potatoes, more potatoes, and quinoa. And also we have this document of food security in Latin America of the IABD. And we see fruits, we see cereals, but we don't see meat. And actually, this has been part of our work. Part of our work, and of course, because Peru has become a gastronomic destination, right? So we're looking for more kinds of meat to offer to the tourists and to the consumer. So, and this effort has become very, very strong here in Peru. And for example, these pictures from the guinea pigs, I'm sorry, I know some of you guys don't even think about eating guinea pigs, but here in Peru, they're important because they grow in high altitudes, and they're part of the food security plan of our country. These pictures, the guinea pigs and the eggs, are part of the food security plan site of Peru. So we are very happy to be developing this. And how do we get there? It's by building capacities, by teaching people how, giving them the skills and the tools in order for them to have their little farms. And of course, making them aware of the importance of adequate use of veterinary medicines, and also telling them that they have to talk to the authorities every time they see a disease that is emerging in their farm. So it's a very complex work because we have multicultural environments, but
1 minute, Carla.
It's worth it. Perfect, thank you. We are part of the Multisectoral Commission of Antimicrobial Resistance, and we're tackling it by banning some antibiotics that are used in poultry production. The Peruvian College of Veterinarians also get together all the deans from the faculties every year, from veterinary faculties of all the countries, in order to improve ways of educating vets. The most important role we have is to fact check information. We get messages in WhatsApp and in other media, and we as veterinarians should inform people about the truth. This is our big role. We work in teams, so we must make our communication easier for others to understand, because sometimes we use fancy words and very technical terms. Others must understand our information in order for communication to flow and things to work. I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to end with what Jose Graciano da Silva said once: there is no food security without food safety. And I must tell you, as a Peruvian, there is no ceviche without food safety. And I've been part of the Food Inspection Authority of Fisheries, and I'm telling you, it's a big, big challenge, but it is completely worth it. Thank you very much for your attention. This is the end of my presentation.
Carla, that was fantastic. And what a great way to finish it off by saying food security and safety go together. So I've loved all the presentations, so much information there. The good news is that these will be available tomorrow on recording, so people can go back to restudy the slides. The graphics were amazing on everybody's slides, so I think they'll be well worth going over again. I'm going to be quite strict because I'm really keen for us to get into the questions. So we're going to have a 5-minute break for people to go and make a cup of tea or a comfort break. And then we'll come back at 20 past. And we're going to be joined by Dr. Milorad Radakovic, who's an advanced practitioner in veterinary public health from the University of Cambridge, who's going to join us in the round table where we've got some great questions to ask our erudite group. And hopefully we'll get some fantastic answers. So looking forward to everybody coming back at 20 past 3 when we'll start the round table. Thanks, everyone.
I will quickly. Thank you very much. My name is Milorad Radakovic. I'm originally from Croatia, and I've been to England for many years and worked all possible jobs, from practical veterinary work to online inspection policy, and in the last 5 years being involved in academia. I'm actively involved with the British Veterinary Association, Veterinary Public Health, and the Federation of Veterinarians in Europe. And thank you for the organizers for inviting me. And thank you for fantastic presentation so far. Carla has already mentioned many things that I wanted to say. This slide just illustrates that it is well known what we do as a veterinarian. With one hand, we give injection and we help animals and we treat them. In another arm, we keep a captive bolt gun if necessary to help animals and to promote welfare. We sometimes do kill and euthanize animals. And sometimes we don't explain very well to people and public what we do, to politicians, to public. And these are buzzwords all around, going now from top right corner. We treat animals, we collect and analyze data. Basically, we contribute to the protection of animals, people, and environment, inspecting. And now moving on to the left, you will see more. And top left corner, we contribute to the trade in animals and animal products around the world. And if there was no vets, there would be no trade of animals and animal byproducts. And maybe we are not good in explaining. Maybe if we simplify everything, it would be much easier for public and for everybody to understand how we actually contribute to this world with our activity. And this is all what I wanted to say for the beginning. I'm happy to try to answer any of the questions. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic, Milorad. Thank you so much for your introduction. So, fantastic presentations. And just let me get the first question up. We've got a number of questions that we're going to talk at the round table too. So the first question, who should be responsible for addressing hunger and food insecurity? So I will not pick on anybody. I'll let you unmute and go for it. So whoever fancies taking that first question. Go on, Evan, go for it.
I can jump in if you want, Anthony. So, yeah. I mean, it's a superb question. And I mean, I think I'd come back to some of my comments earlier on that hunger, to a large extent, is a function of a lack of ability to access food that is available on the market. I mean, the role of poverty in creating famines as opposed to the role of drought in creating famines is well articulated, well studied by the literature, and to a large extent, it's issues that are linked with poverty that cause people to have access, lack of access. Also, of course, people in civil war conflicts or areas with civil unrest typically experience the worst hunger. So the causes of hunger are much more complicated than simply availability of food or the ability to produce food or even the ability to distribute food, and are linked with poverty and conflict and whatnot. So if that's the driver of hunger, then the answer then is who is responsible for addressing poverty and who's responsible for keeping civil society or politics stable. And that then becomes, to a large extent, the role of government in one part. But the programs aren't necessarily agricultural focused, they're really focused on poverty. And certainly in a developing world context and in a developed world context, and I use those words very carefully, reducing poverty programs is critical. Increasing the enrollment of girls in primary schools is well known as a way of over the long term addressing hunger and malnutrition. And so it's those sort of policies that will get at the root causes of this.
Of course, Evan, it's good to see. I think it was in Kees's presentations that actually poverty and extreme hunger are reducing, albeit we've just had the COVID, or we are in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and that may worsen things. But over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been massive progress in those areas, hasn't there?
So, Anthony, I agree with you, and I'd like to hear other panelists as well. My reading of the United Nations literature is that between about 1975 and 2015, there were year in, year out declines in poverty and hunger, both as an absolute number and as a proportion of the world's population. But starting in 2015, we've now seen 5 years of continual increases in poverty and hunger, linked to a large extent with civil war and worse poverty. Now, climate change then undermines agricultural productivity, which exacerbates poverty for small-scale farmers. That's the link. But yeah, for the last 5 years, unfortunately, we've started to move away from that continuous decades-long movement of progress. It's very depressing, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that is. Does anybody else want to just make a comment on that? Anything?
I think I can confirm even that one. I could confirm that indeed the figures in Ethiopia are still improving, but they are also sliding off now. We are not achieving the same level of improvements that we managed, let's say, from 2000 to 2015. So it is leveling off. And moreover, we can see that the amount of animal source foods that are consumed by the general population is in fact decreasing. The amount of meat in Ethiopia in the 60s was something like 20 kilos a year. Now it is only 8 kilos a year. So, and that shows that, food access to enough resources to buy animal source food is an important aspect. I think, the question is as well that we have to sort of restructure the world if we want food security in the world. We need to rethink maybe even capitalism, because I think it automatically creates rich countries and poor countries. And poor countries, in the poor countries, we see the difference between rich and poor rapidly increasing. That is what capitalism brings. So we also see a lot of the rural people, in fact, dropping out. And in just in my time in Ethiopia, I've seen the number of poor people increasing by 1 million a year about. And also a very small group of very rich people that have the obesitas, of course, over.
Do you think people on the seminar, do you think that there's also a responsibility of government, rich governments? The UK has actually decreased its commitment to give 0.7% of its GDP. Is that something that we really need perhaps to relook at, as rich nations, to actually make sure that we're doing that and maybe a larger percentage? Anybody want to make a comment on that?
Clearly it makes a difference, but it shouldn't, we shouldn't depend on donor money only. There's also within countries themselves. And I was trying to contribute earlier. As Gijs and Evan have said, it's terribly complex, but I think that, livestock and all of us working in animal health and animal production and so on, we do have a role to play. If you think of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that livestock contributes directly to 8 of them and indirectly to all of them. So we are right there. You cannot work towards achieving those sustainable development goals if livestock is not considered. So I think we can and we should really perhaps be more involved. And And I agree with my predecessors. Access is such an important aspect that many of us in this part of the world, take for granted. But we really, and that is part of the research also that we are conducting, that for many may seem so obvious, but there is still a lot of need to really reduce the animal source production costs. So, we know that feed can take up to 80% of production costs. So as much as I think as a vet that animal disease or livestock disease is important, it is, of course, but livestock feeding is also incredibly important if we want to reduce the cost of these animal source foods. So yeah, that is...
That's great. Thank you so much, Saskia. We'll maybe move on to the second question. We've got a few questions to cover. What are the methods and tools to measure food insecurity? Could similar indicators be used to measure food security in countries living at different economic statuses? Again, please feel free to unmute and have a crack at the question.
I mean, Gijs mentioned in his presentation the Global Hunger Index. I think that is a widely used index that can be applied to many settings. And there are really, I think, about 5 methods or so that I use. So estimating the calorie intake per capita that FAO uses, so that is more at national level. Then you can also look at household incomes and expenditure. You can also, and this is something that in our line of work, looking at young children and so on, we use all these anthropometric things of head circumference and the stunting, the height for age, and so on. So there are different methods. I don't think there's a need there's a lack of methods to assess. It's also, if you do that, then what are you going to do about it? Measuring is important, but then what? So that's
maybe in support of that. There is also a system developed by FAO on IPC, integrated phase classification, and in that way we identify. I showed one map in my presentation where we have these 5 different levels of crisis, or from no crisis to crisis to famine. So I think I agree. We have got enough systems in place to measure. It is more how are we going to deal with it. Over.
Thank you, Kees. That's fantastic. And Saskia. Our third question is, what are the best approaches to substantially alleviate hunger and food insecurity globally? We're beginning to see those gains being lost as over the last 5 years, things have deteriorated. How can we turn that around again?
Can I tip in, please? And can you hear me? I don't think that.
Yeah, Milorad, you're coming loud and clear. That's great.
Is my camera working? I don't think that I'm on.
No, I think for some reason your camera isn't working, so I don't know if there's an issue there. But please feel free to answer the question.
I think what we as a profession could do here, we could do our best within our abilities to contribute to the food security and to each country and each society. It is a very, very difficult to give what is the best approach. There are differences between developing and developed worlds and distribution, and we have heard from our fantastic speakers, and there are a lot of waste food, and there is enough food. Basically, it's a little bit about distribution of that food. Maybe we could do better, and I think that could be a good starting point without going too much into details.
No, I think that's a really great point, Milorad. Anybody else want to?
No, maybe a little bit. I would like to go. We need a change in the world. Maybe people have read the book Donut Economics, and I think a lot of the questions are raised in that book. people in Ethiopia, before they can have access to food, there needs to be major changes in the economy, in the household economy. I've got people working in my house. I would not know how to live off the money that I'm paying, and I'm paying almost triple what they are paid by non-foreigners. But I would not be able to live a day from that money.
Yeah.
So I think that's to establish a change in that, having enough money to have access requires much more than just distribution of food. It is
distribution of wealth as well, Kees.
Exactly. We see distribution of wealth in the world. We see now a small portion of the people becoming very rich, and a majority of the people, in fact, poorer. And I think this is what needs to change. And that's why I mentioned in the former thing, capitalism. I think we should see the end of capitalism and create a different kind of situation in the world over.
Yes, that's a really great point. I think there's also a book called Conscious Capitalism. Maybe, if businesses, because, will government solve this problem, or is it purpose-centered businesses coming up with ideas? Some of the great innovations that Evan was showing, is that part of the solution as well? I don't know if you want to comment on that, Evan, or Saskia or Carla.
Sure. I mean, for me, it's a portfolio of strategies that will need to be embarked on, because there's no such thing as a free lunch, and there's lots of trade-offs. I would start with poverty alleviation strategies that focus on the most marginal. So, education programs for little girls in the developing world would be one place that I would really start on. But that wouldn't exclude the importance of, I think, creating national, international frameworks that pay farmers for environmental goods and services. And we've got beginnings of those sort of programs through the United Nations RED program. That's the Reduce Emissions Through Avoided Desertification and Deforestation program. Basically carbon credits for lower greenhouse gas emission farming practices. So providing income streams to protect the environment is a crucial part of the policy portfolio. As is basic R&D into new technologies that might be AI-driven planting systems through to alternative protein systems. I'm increasingly of the opinion, and I think this probably came through in my remarks, that the digital agricultural revolution is upon us. The level of disruption will likely be huge, but it's a question of, for policymakers and society to decide whether that this new wave of innovation that's upon us does more than just breed a new generation of tech billionaires. Will it actually serve public and global environmental goods? So innovation is the third part of the portfolio that I would say is.
And COVID has been helping and been a catalyst for that digital decade that we've now begun at the 2020s, hasn't it?
It's throwing gasoline on the fire.
Any comments from Saskia or Carla about that before we move on to the next question?
Yes, actually, I would like to comment that it is something that's happening here in Peru, and I see that happens in every country, in many countries, that we should understand we're part of a whole system, and we must see the system as a whole, I mean, in its integrity, and each stakeholder of the system must have its role very clear. And that's a problem we have here. The stakeholders, for example, the private companies, don't have the role clear in, for example, a food safety system. I know it's food security system, but I'm telling you about the experience I've had here. So the academia is not fulfilling its role to its best. So of research and educating more people in order to tackle food safety problems. So I think that it is very important for governments and for also other stakeholders from private sector, from the civil society, to understand that they have a role and we have to fulfill it, right?
Thank you, Carla. That's great. Just moving on to the next question, which I think is one that's been really well covered within the presentations. It's great to have so many vets in the as the speakers. No offense, Evan. What is the impact of widespread livestock disease on food security at the different production systems, agrarian, agropastoral, and pastoral? Or is that something that we are beginning to sort out with our technology and with our knowledge?
No, I think I saw some recent data. So I manage a project in the pastoral areas bordering Uganda and Kenya in East Africa. And because of the COVID-19 travel restrictions and impact on society, so the normal dipping of animals against tick-borne diseases couldn't happen. And we clearly see, an increase in disease, in tick-borne diseases, but also death of these, tick-borne, relatively, I would say, preventable diseases. Of course, if you only have 4 or 5, maybe goats and 2 heads of cattle or more, and you lose one of them, of course, that's going to impact severely on your household wealth and so on. And as Gijs also explained, this is the buffer that these families have. And again, also because of these restrictions, many were not even allowed to go to the field to plant. So harvest all over the world have been severely impacted. And what do you do if the harvest fails? You sell the goat, or you sell, selling a cattle is a head of cattle is a much bigger thing. But the goats and the, so I think it has really impacted. And also the disease itself, but also why the disease happened because of these external factors that occurred. So yeah, unfortunately we will see, things go worse before they go better again.
So COVID's had a really bad effect on that whole kind of food security by stopping people just being able to get on and do their work as well. Yeah. Does anybody else want to make a point on that? Gijs, I think you...
Yeah, it is an issue that is close to my heart indeed.
Yeah.
In pastoral areas of Ethiopia, we still have got huge young stock mortality.
Yeah.
Up to 25% of the sheep and goats, and up to 15% of the calves from cattle. Now, diseases like PPR, CCCP, CBPP, whatever, lots of diseases have a major impact there on the young stock. So to have vaccination programs that are in fact relatively cheap could prevent a lot. Of course, on the other side, there is the environment, there is the droughts and whatever. How do we bring pastoralists into more let's say economic, or in the mainstream economy, is that they can sell animals. So you need infrastructure, and I think the major thing as well in the pastoral areas is that they need to secure the core dry season grazing areas. And what we see is agriculture expanding into the core dry season grazing areas, making pastoralism less viable, because in times of drought they are harder hit. So I think there is an environmental issue. We have to have much more a landscape approach in developing livestock in these areas, with animal disease control integrated into that. Yeah, I think that's my contribution. I have seen how, let's say, rinderpest eradication, I have seen that in the pastoral areas, it was killing 20% of livestock every year. And taking that one course away gave a boost. But then there are many other diseases. So we need a far better veterinary service delivery, addressing many diseases at the same time. Over.
Does anybody else want to make a comment on that? Because it's obviously a huge problem.
Yeah, I must add, I belong to an authority, and actually diseases also, over all the impact, economical impacts that has to people that work with animals, also limits the exports of countries, of whole countries. So when we detected, for example, some disease, it was impossible for us to export any specific or different products to other countries. So it also makes an impact in the whole nationwide. I mean,
yeah, no, it's a great point, Carla. Moving on to our next question, there may be insufficient recognition among educational institutions about this topic. Are there some resources educators could use to enable them to easily insert food security into the curriculum? Is that something we should be thinking about, or?
I wouldn't.
Definitely. I think if I may start, working at a university, this is a topic that we try to also influence our colleagues. And again, for some colleagues, it's so, many, and this is not a criticism, but many don't think beyond Florida or think beyond the US. So really, we need to also broaden this up. And I think, again, that the pandemic has shown that also in the US, there's so many food insecure people that it's really not business as usual, and it has brought it home for many people. I've uploaded some resources in terms of food security. There is something from FAO, a 1.5 hour session that I thought was very interesting. USAID also has many materials. And then I think what is also important is, making the link, and we didn't really touch upon that today, but food security and gender. So really we need to also consider, and when in terms of educational materials, that is also something that we should address in whatever we include in our curriculum, because that does have a major impact on household food security.
It's fantastic. We've had some great resources being put into the chat box, which I would advise people go into, click on the links. You've got them saved on your computer. You can look at them. But what we'll also do, I'm going to be unpopular with Dawn now, but I'll ask Dawn to bring those together at the end and make sure that we get those out to the people who have registered for the talks as well. So, but Milorad wants to make a comment.
Yes, thank you very much. I wouldn't just use this word that is insufficient recognition. I would rather say that one way or another, we don't articulate well our contribution. And we always teach about food security. If we take food security as a combination of quantity, quality, and safety, each of our core curriculum, veterinary curriculum, and each veterinary school around the world is aiming to teach students how to protect animals, how to protect through animals, protect people and environment. And that is maybe at the beginning the way how I try to articulate, and Carla mentioned, and everybody mentioned one way or another what I'm saying now, all speakers in a summary. But what could be even more focused and more articulated on undergraduate level. But there is a big problem here. In a developed world, the most important problem or worry is use by date. If it is one day over, whether food is going to be thrown, is it safe or unsafe? Whilst what Saskia says, and yes, in Ethiopia and some other countries, that may not be the most important issue to teach, and how to find the balance for us educationalists here, it is not easy.
I like the idea from Evan that the food changes color, I think it was, to sort of stop us having to waste all these potatoes and eggs that we're wasting, because of course this is criminal when we're throwing food away. Maybe we need to come to the final question. How does the veterinary profession and professionals play a role in the national and global efforts to ensure food security? I mean, I think the first thing I would say, obviously including Evan in this as well, as an agriculturalist, as well as veterinarians, all of you are doing such a fabulous work in your different fields. So from me as kind of the audience, thank you for the fabulous work you're doing. But perhaps in a couple of sentences, how can we, as a global profession, actually, improve and do better than we are doing at the moment? So a couple of sentences for everybody who wants to comment on that, and then we'll be moving over to Patricia to give us her final thoughts on the topic. Go on, Evan, you go first.
Sure. So, I mean, the biggest issue facing the food system, in my opinion, prior to the pandemic, well, the biggest two issues were distribution and poverty on one side and the environmental impact of production on the other side. So where animal agriculture and the veterinary professions rubber hits the road on those two issues is on the poverty side, where animal agriculture is a vital component of a livelihood for poor farmers. That's crucial, and so supporting those people to make sure that they are as profitable and financially viable as possible. And then the other side of the coin, addressing the disproportionately large effect that many forms of animal agriculture have on the environment today. And for me, focusing on those two big issues is the really crucial part of the this big project of feeding the future.
And I will just give a little plug again, the email there, feeding9billion.com. I haven't heard of it before, Evan, but I will have a look at that after the talk. Does Milorad want to go next?
I just want to say, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, we haven't articulated well so far how we contributed to the current situation in food security. And in order, that would be a benchmark for an improvement then. We haven't articulated it nationally and internationally. We could do better in explaining what we do and how we contribute.
No, I think that's a great point.
Well, I think Carla did an excellent job with her presentation. It really, with that initial figure from the World Organization for Animal Health, and then going step by step, and also, the assumptions of colleagues. Why do you have as a vet a role in this to play? I agree that we need to do better, but I think today was at least a very good presentation. I really enjoyed that, and I will use some of that, in future presentations myself. Thank you, Carol.
I think it was also a great point from you, Saskia, of how involved animals are in fulfilling those UN goals of sustainable development, and they are, I think, a fabulous resource that the UN have put together to make us, help us be clear about where we can contribute and make a difference in the world. So thank you for that within your presentation.
Maybe
Carla, yes, go on, you go next.
Yeah, maybe if in developing countries, livestock is often under the Ministry of Agriculture, and livestock always has to compete with agriculture. And if you look to the funding levels, livestock is always pulling the shortest match. It's underfunding of many programs is an issue. And I think if we are living in one global world and we have diseases that can easily spread from Africa to other countries, we have seen African swine fever leaving the continent to Asia and what it does, what impact it has. I think it is, we have to look at diseases from a global perspective, and funding for disease control might come from outside, because in Africa, it's difficult to get the funds together to do a program, let's say a vaccination program for PPR in the past, whatever. Yeah. The funds is not there. We are competing with health, with education. Maybe because it was before mentioned, in Ethiopia, 50% of the population is below 18 years. And if you talk about education, and you have to educate 50% of the population, how many teachers do you need? How many schools do you need? And so the funds are going there, and livestock is pulling the shortest string. And I think international community could assist in the control of these diseases over.
Yes, that's a great point. I know one of my friends is very involved in a charity called Send a Cow. I think this is, areas that we can really help in. But Carla, I'm going to leave you with the final words.
Yeah, thank you.
No pressure.
Thank you, Saskia, for the nice comments. I think that something I've learned here teaching veterinary students is that we have to build a food safety, well, actually I was addressing food safety, but a food security culture. I think that if you do that in faculties, you can start from the first year and all courses, focusing on, in a way, of course, the ones are relevant, focusing on this food security problem and telling veterinarians that they are completely capable of tackling it, working with multidisciplinary teams. So I think that this is the best part of being a veterinarian, is that we can enjoy being part of different teams and we can communicate with other people, but we really must learn how to work in teams, and we really must understand our role in this situation that is, of course, affecting everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. That's beautifully put together. I think great to see all the veterinarians, but Evan, you'll be proud of me. I've got my apple that I started to eat during the break. I'm conscious that I probably don't do 39% of fruit and veg. So that's going to be my learning point, that I'm going to start trying to have a bit more of a balanced diet as well. So I'm going to pass over now to the World Veterinary Association President, Patricia, to give her thoughts and to close the meeting. So thank you, everyone, and over to you, Pat.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And I'm really not going to try to add anything to what individuals have said. I really want to thank our distinguished speakers and panelists for helping the World Veterinary Association to start a conversation on this critical topic of global food security. It's a topic that will require active engagement of veterinary professionals around the world. And as has been emphasized, it is really important that we be explicit about the role of veterinarians in this global challenge. I'd also like to thank the WVA Secretariat and the One Health Strategic Focus Group, as well as Webinar Vet, for organizing such an excellent group of speakers and for this very smoothly run seminar today. As has been mentioned, all of this material will become available for participants and others on the website in the not too distant future. So thank you so much again, and thank you as well to our attendees and participants today for all of your great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you very much.